Do you really know the people around you? You think you can sense when something's off. You trust your intuition. When someone's toxic, when a mood darkens a room, when a boundary is crossed. But what if I told you that the real danger isn't the obvious kind? What if the most destructive forces in your life were familiar faces? Not enemies, but friends. Not abusers, but smiling, soft-spoken caretakers, maybe even family. See, while you're guarding yourself from the loud monsters, you might be opening the doors of your mind to something far more insidious, the unconscious of others, silently bleeding into your own. Carl Jung didn't spend decades mapping the psyche to warn us of fairy tale villains. He studied the invisible. He understood that what controls us most lies outside of our conscious awareness, not just in you, in everyone. And that's precisely where the danger lies, because people who refuse to face their own darkness don't destroy themselves, they destroy others, and often that other is you. You felt it, haven't you? You walk away from a conversation and feel lighter, or maybe emptier, as if something was taken from you. Even though no words were harsh, you were blamed for something you didn't do, pulled into a drama that never belonged to you. And worse, you felt needed, so you stayed. That's not empathy, that's invasion. What Jung called projection, the psyche's way of unloading what it cannot face. And the target, anyone close enough to carry the weight. In that moment, you're no longer seen as a person. You become a mirror, a villain, a savior, a container. But none of those identities belong to you. The most disturbing part, you may not even realize it's happening. You think you're helping, you think you're being kind, but you're slowly being absorbed into a psychic battlefield that isn't yours, solving problems that were never yours, and suffering wounds that don't belong to your story. And no, this isn't just about toxic people. This isn't about cruelty. It's about unconsciousness. Because the most dangerous people in your life aren't necessarily evil. They're unaware. Unaware of their masks. Unaware of their wounds. Unaware of the shadow puppeting their every word and silence. That's what makes them so dangerous. Not the malice, but the lack of self-awareness. They infect you with their unhealed story. Not with knives, but with glances, guilt, praise, silence, until you begin to question your own voice. And once your connection to your own psyche is weakened, you become an extension of theirs. You become part of the shadow they refuse to face. You may be experiencing this right now, in a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in your workplace, or around your kitchen table. You've been asking what's wrong with you. But the real question is, what part of you is being hijacked by someone else's unconscious? In this video, we'll expose the 6 psychological profiles Jung would identify as emotionally dangerous, not because they mean harm, but because they're driven by internal forces they've never dared to confront. We'll draw directly from Jung's core works, Ion, the ego and the unconscious, and archetypes and the collective unconscious, to decode how these patterns form, how they infect, and how they survive through you. But we won't stop there, because if you're truly ready for this journey, you'll need to ask something deeper. Which of these patterns lives in you? Take a breath. Stay with me. After this, you will not look at others or yourself the same way again. Imagine living with someone who makes you responsible for everything they feel, not with words, but with sighs, with silences, with that look that says, you've done something wrong again. At first, they seem fragile, sensitive, deep, but as time passes, you begin to feel like you're walking through a minefield, blindfolded. Every step triggers something, and slowly you realize this battlefield isn't even yours, but you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator. Not a villain in the traditional sense, but someone who hasn't made peace with their own pain and uses you as a stand-in for the war inside them. Jung said, "What we do not make conscious will appear in our lives as fate." And sometimes that fate sleeps beside you, sits across from you, calls you friend, partner, even family. These people are ruled by repressed memories, unintegrated wounds, emotional fragments too painful to face directly, so they project them, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know who else to give their pain to. Jung wrote that projection is a natural function of the psyche, but when it's not recognized, it becomes dangerous. It distorts perception. It causes what he called psychic blindness, where people no longer see others as they truly are, but as reflections of what they refuse to see in themselves. That's exactly what the unconscious manipulator does. They don't see you. They see their own abandonment, their shame, their inadequacy, painted onto your face, and they react, not to you, but to that inner ghost. You'll notice the signs. They're always the victim. When they're angry, it's because you made them feel unsafe. When they're sad, it's because you failed them. When they feel inferior, it's because you must think you're better than them. Over time, this distortion sinks in. You'll start asking yourself, did I say something wrong? Am I insensitive? Maybe I am the problem. This is how the manipulation works. Silently, without accusation, without control, just presence, emotional gravity. And the trap is even deeper because these people are often magnetic. They carry a certain intensity, a tragic beauty. They seem like someone who feels more than others. And so you tell yourself, I get them. I can help. I just need to love them harder. But you're not healing them. You're bleeding for them. You're sinking, trying to rescue someone who refuses to swim inward. Jung warned us about this. He said that projection turns people into symbols, saviors, traitors, mothers, monsters, everything, except who they truly are. And when you're trapped in someone else's symbolic story, you stop being seen. You start being used as a screen for someone else's unconscious film. To break this spell, you must do one thing. Wake up, recognize the pattern. Ask yourself, is this emotion really mine? Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't break into your life with force. They slip in through the open door of your empathy, your kindness, your need to fix. And once they're inside, they build a home out of your self-doubt. But this is just the beginning, because behind the unconscious manipulator lurks a more polished shadow, the bearer of the persona, the one who doesn't just project, they perform. They construct their entire identity to be seen a certain way. And in doing so, they lose themselves. And if you're not careful, they'll take you with them. In the next section, we'll explore this psychological mask, why Jung considered it one of the most dangerous forces in human interaction, and how you can tell when you're being pulled into someone else's performance instead of a real relationship. If this content resonates with you, if you felt this dynamic but never had words for it, now you do. Click subscribe, join the journey, and thank you for walking this path with awareness. Not all psychological danger comes with sharp edges. Sometimes it's dressed in a flawless suit. Sometimes it smiles too easily. Sometimes it never breaks. You see it in the polished tone, the perfectly timed response, the person who's always composed, always agreeable, always appropriate, and something inside you whispers, this isn't real. Carl Jung didn't fear monsters in the dark. He feared masks in the daylight. He called it the persona, the social mask we wear to function, to be liked, to fit, to belong. But when someone begins to believe the mask is their face, they lose all access to who they really are. And worse, they begin to pull you into their illusion too. In The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung wrote, the persona is what someone is not, but what they and others think they are. It's an identity forged in expectation, not authenticity. We all wear it, you, me, everyone. It helps us play roles, parent, boss, student, friend. But the danger begins when the role becomes a cage, when the spontaneous, vulnerable self is no longer welcome in the performance. It's pushed underground, buried, forgotten, and the mask begins to smile, even when the soul is in ruins. The bearer of the persona is a master of high-functioning detachment. They say what's expected. They avoid conflict. They stay nice, but beneath the perfect surface, they are suffocating, and you can feel it. Even if you can't explain it, conversations feel rehearsed, emotions feel flat, depth is absent, and truth, the real, unfiltered kind, becomes radioactive. Worse, they project their artificial expectations onto you. You're expected to match the script, to stay inside the lines, to avoid the uncomfortable, show too much emotion, you're too much, ask a hard question, you're dramatic, express pain, they pull away, because anything raw reminds them of the self they've buried. Jung warned, the greatest threat to individuation is over-identification with the persona, because once you confuse your role with your soul, you stop growing, you stop integrating the unconscious, you live for applause, but never truth. And here's where it gets insidious. When you live with someone like this, you begin to adapt. You start editing yourself. You begin measuring your words. You hide your spontaneity. You shrink your truth. And then one day, without realizing it, you've put on a mask too, not to deceive, but to survive. This is what makes the persona so dangerous. It's not just artificial, it's contagious. And yet, there's something darker still, because when someone represses what they truly feel, what they think, what they need, it doesn't disappear. It festers, it grows claws in the unconscious, until it becomes something Jung called the shadow, the denied self, hungry for expression. And the longer it's ignored, the more violently it returns. In the next section, we'll descend into this underworld. We'll confront the psychological profile of the one who has buried their darkness for too long, until it finally explodes on themselves and everyone around them. If you're still with me, take a breath. You're not just learning psychology, you're peeling back the layers of your own reflection. Let's go deeper. There's a kind of person who never raises their voice. They're composed, measured, polite, always appropriate, always in control. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm is brewing, because everything they believe is unacceptable. Every dark urge, wild impulse, raw emotion hasn't been healed. It's been buried. This is the owner of the repressed shadow, someone who tries so hard to be light. That darkness becomes their only escape. Carl Jung devoted a lifetime to understanding this inner rupture. In Ion, he wrote, the shadow is everything that the individual refuses to acknowledge about themselves, yet it still insists on being lived. We're not talking about some external evil. This isn't about monsters or abusers or the world outside you. This is about you. The hatred you won't admit to feeling, the envy you mask with fake praise, the rage you silence with shallow smiles, the ambition you dress up as humility, the desire you shame in silence. Whatever you deny in yourself doesn't vanish. It festers. It becomes the shadow, and what you refuse to make conscious ends up controlling your life. You just call it destiny. Now here's the trap. The owner of the repressed shadow rarely looks dangerous. In fact, they're often admired, disciplined, kind, helpful. You'd never suspect anything's wrong. But look closely. They don't tolerate weakness in others. They flinch at authenticity. They shut down around intensity. They never cry. They never crack. Until one day, they do. And when they finally break, it isn't a release. It's a detonation. Because someone who lives in emotional lockdown isn't just controlling their feelings. They're building pressure. And when that pressure finds no outlet, it explodes through judgment, cruelty, passive aggression, or withdrawal so cold it cuts deeper than rage ever could. You've seen it. People who explode over small things, who never forget a slight, who sabotage connection with bitterness and blame, who hold their smile like a knife. These are the emotionally landmined, and if you live near them, you walk carefully, you police your words, you breathe shallow, not because you're fragile, but because their pain has nowhere to go, so it leaks into you. Jung warned us, the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. And when that shadow is ignored, it always comes back, not as self-awareness, but as destruction, usually aimed at those who get too close. But here's the twist. The shadow isn't just made of darkness. It holds your light too, your hidden potential, your repressed creativity, your forbidden passion, your courage, your voice, your hunger for life. If you deny it, it becomes poison. But if you integrate it, it becomes power. Because the shadow is never here to destroy you. It's here to complete you, but only if you're willing to meet it, eye to eye. And yet, most don't. Most choose repression over truth. They hide behind false virtue, inflated morality, not to become better, but to feel superior. This brings us to the next psychological mask, the moral controller. Someone who doesn't just repress their own desires, but makes you feel guilty for having yours. In the next section, we'll unmask this figure, the guardian of appearance, the enforcer of guilt, the enemy of inner freedom. They speak in the name of virtue, but behind their polished words hide some of the darkest demons of all. Take a breath, because from here we go deeper. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some wield scriptures, others rules. Most just use guilt. They speak of virtue, of right and wrong, of what's best for you. But behind their polished morality lurks a cage, not made of steel, but of shame. This is the moral controller dash, the one who hides their unconscious behind the mask of righteousness. Jung warned us of this archetype. He understood that morality, when weaponized, becomes one of the most dangerous forms of repression, because it doesn't just bind the self, it shackles everyone nearby. The moral controller is not aware of their shadow. They don't seek to understand it. They project it dash onto you. They condemn your desires because they've buried their own. They shame your choices because they never dared to make theirs. They claim the high ground, but it's built on denial. You've met them. You may even love them. The ones who never stop correcting, who are quick to point fingers but slow to reflect, who hold themselves up as moral beacons, not because they are one, but because they need to believe they are. Jung wrote that the more someone represses their shadow, the more they are compelled to project it outward. That's the essence of the moral controller. They turn the world into a mirror of their own denied impulses, calling others impure, deviant, broken, so they can preserve the illusion of personal virtue. The danger here is subtle. They don't manipulate like the obvious narcissist. They don't scream, they don't threaten. They guide you, they correct you. They tell you it's for your own good. It's because I care. You'll understand when you're older. I just want what's best. But what they really want is control. Control over your emotions. Control over your freedom. Control over who you're allowed to be. And the scariest part? They believe they're helping, that they're saving you. Jung explored this deeply in Ion, through the archetypes of Christ and Antichrist. One embodies integration, the other division. The moral controller plays the role of the light, but cannot see the darkness clinging to their own back. And so they become blind, dangerous, unaware of the complexity of the soul, reducing it to obedience, purity, and shame. Live near someone like this long enough, and you begin to feel as if everything you are is wrong. You walk on eggshells not because they punish you, but because you punish yourself. You start hiding your natural impulses. You repress your own joy, your own curiosity, your own sensuality, to fit an ideal that was never yours. Their morality becomes your prison, and you forget how to live outside it. This dynamic is everywhere, in families, in religion, in schools, in relationships where love is conditional, and freedom is bought with silence. Jung saw this as a direct threat to individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole, because where there is excessive moralism, there is always a lack of self-knowledge. The moral controller doesn't want truth. They want order, not clarity, but submission. And when they can't control the outer world, they start reshaping the inner world of everyone around them. But repression is not the only danger. There is another force far more volatile, more impulsive, more unpredictable. Someone who is not repressing the unconscious, but being controlled by it. This is the next figure, the complex individual. Where the moralist hides their shadow behind virtue, the complex person is ruled by it. Raw, emotional, explosive. They can embrace you today and destroy you tomorrow without even knowing why. In the next section, we'll step into this chaotic realm where the psyche no longer leads and trauma takes the wheel. Prepare to meet the one who doesn't wear a mask because their wounds have become their face. Imagine loving someone who keeps changing faces. One day they're warm, tender, even beautiful. The next, they shatter over a joke, a gesture, a silence. You didn't change, but the rules did. And now, you're walking through a house where the floor keeps disappearing beneath your feet. This is what it feels like to live with someone dominated by unconscious complexes. Those emotional fragments Jung called autonomous psychic forces. They don't whisper, they possess. A complex is not a bad mood. It's a trauma, half buried, half alive, acting through someone who doesn't realize they're reliving history. In Psychological Types and the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains, complexes are pockets of past pain. With a voice, a mood, a trigger, they hijack the present with echoes of the past. A casual remark opens the wound of childhood abandonment. A forgotten message stirs a storm of betrayal. A kind gesture becomes twisted into proof of pity or manipulation. And the one trapped inside these complexes, they don't know they're acting from pain. They believe they're being logical, that you are the problem, that you are the one who changed. But they're not arguing with you. They're arguing with their past. And you're just close enough to catch the shrapnel. The worst part? It's not always like this. There are moments of light, moments when they hold you with such tenderness. You believe it's over. You believe this is who they really are. And maybe it is, but it doesn't last. Because no matter how beautiful those moments are, they're followed by emotional storms you didn't see coming. So what do? You shrink. You adapt. You walk on eggshells. You measure every word. You read every silence. You try to predict which version of them will show up today. And you tell yourself, it's not that bad. They don't mean to hurt me. Maybe if I'm more careful. But here's the brutal truth. The monster inside them was never sleeping. It was waiting. Complexes don't rest. They reside. And the more you try to keep the peace, the more you sacrifice yourself to a force that isn't yours. Jung warned, what you do not make conscious becomes your fate. And in the case of the complexed individual, fate becomes possession. They aren't just influenced by their unconscious. They are ruled by it. One moment, they're overwhelmed by inferiority. The next, they become the martyr, the victim, the persecuted. Each complex has its own emotion, its own story, its own demand. And when triggered, it speaks louder than love ever could. Trying to calm this chaos is like negotiating with ghosts. No matter how gentle you are, they don't hear you because they're not listening from now. They're listening from a decade ago, from a wound that still bleeds under the surface. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to disappear. Your words feel like lies. Your memory feels uncertain. You start to wonder if you are the one who's unstable. But you're not. You're just being colonized by their unconscious. Because when someone lives in emotional chaos long enough, they don't just destroy themselves. they start pulling others into the storm. And yet, even this is not the final danger, because there is a type more subtle, more patient, more draining. They don't explode. They don't accuse. They don't break down. They feed on your attention, on your kindness, on your presence, until you have nothing left. In the final section, we will meet this last figure, the psychic vampire, the one who never shouts, but still leaves you hollow. And with them, we will close this cycle, not in fear, but with clarity, because Jung didn't just map the unconscious jungle. He pointed toward the way out. Stay with me. The final truth is coming. Some people don't want your presence. They want your energy, and they'll take it, not with violence, but with softness, with stories, with endless need disguised as closeness. This is the psychic vampire. They won't scream. They won't chase. They won't demand. They'll just lean until your shoulders start to ache under a weight that was never yours to carry. Carl Jung never used the term psychic vampire, but he saw them clearly. In his work on the ego and the unconscious and ion, he warned of a psychic danger far more subtle than the shadow, more binding than the persona, more destabilizing than the complex. It's the symbiotic bond, where two people no longer meet as individuals, but as extensions, attachments, emotional limbs of each other. The psychic vampire lives inside this bond. They feed on your time, your comfort, your availability, but no matter how much you give, it's never enough, because what they're trying to fill is not a wound, it's a void. At first, you're kind. You support. You stay up late listening. You forgive the manipulation, the guilt, the subtle emotional blackmail, all in the name of understanding. But slowly, something starts to slip. Your boundaries, your time, your center of gravity. And then one day, you wake up and realize you no longer know where they end and you begin. It's not just physical exhaustion. It's existential. Your soul, slowly drained in droplets. Jung described these bonds as parasitic, not in cruelty, but in truth. There are people who cannot carry themselves, so they cling, not to grow, but to survive. And in doing so, they dissolve you. You begin to feel guilty for needing space, selfish for needing silence, cold for wanting distance, because the psychic vampire is a master of role reversal. They start as the victim and become the accuser. They beg for closeness, then punish you for not giving enough. Before you realize it, your life is no longer about living. It's about maintaining peace, preventing meltdowns, protecting a relationship that's killing you. But here is where the truth cuts deeper. You've been them too. At some point in your life, you've been the vampire, the controller, the persona, the shadow, because none of us are immune. We all have pain. We all have masks. We all have moments when we hand the steering wheel of our soul to the unconscious. The question is not who's broken. The question is who's willing to look within. This video wasn't just an explanation. It was a mirror, a quiet confrontation. And if you've made it this far, it means you're ready to name it, to face it, to begin the slow, sacred process of taking your soul back. That is individuation, not blame, not perfection, but sovereignty. The moment you stop living as a hostage to the unseen and start reclaiming the right to see clearly. Now, I want you to participate. Leave a comment below. Tell us which of these archetypes you've encountered and which ones you've seen in yourself. Your words might be the spark that wakes someone else up. And before you go, this journey is not over. The next video takes us even deeper into Jung's map of the psyche. You need to see it, because the more light you bring into the dark, the less the dark owns you. I'll see you there. Keep walking. Have you ever agreed to something while your entire body whispered no in protest? Have you ever put on a smile to keep things smooth while something inside you was quietly breaking apart? Maybe you feel drained, worn down in ways you can't quite explain. There's a kind of hurt that doesn't leave bruises. It's silent, steady, and nearly invisible. And it starts the moment you begin abandoning your truth. Gesture by gesture, day after day, you become careful. You adjust your tone. You say what sounds right. You swallow what feels real. All to avoid upsetting others, to dodge disapproval, to fit in. And with enough repetition, this becomes your normal. For a time, it seems to work. People appreciate you. You become dependable, easy, polished. But under that well-formed surface, a strange emptiness starts to stir. A subtle unease that grows slowly. A sense that some part of you is slipping away, forgotten, dismissed, compressed into silence. Carl Jung had a word for this mask we wear. He called it persona. It's not inherently bad. We all rely on it to move through the world, to function, to belong. But there's a danger when we lose track of where the mask ends and we begin. When the performance consumes the person. When the need to be accepted starts to suffocate what's real. Because buried behind the role is someone messy, someone angry sometimes, someone with thoughts that don't always make sense or make others comfortable. And when you lock that version of yourself away, when you reject it just to maintain the image, something in you begins to fracture. You feel it, though you might not have the words for it. Like you're living a script you didn't write. Like you're stuck in a play where the curtains never fall and you never get to step off stage. But this isn't a call to become reckless. It's not about burning every bridge or rejecting connection. This is about something deeper. Learning to notice when your craving for approval is slowly pulling you away from your own center. It's about pausing long enough to realize you've been shaping your life around being liked instead of being whole. Let me be honest with you. This quiet form of self-abandonment doesn't come without a price. It may not scream like a wound, but it bleeds in other ways. It arrives as anxiety that clings without reason, as confusion about who you are, as bitterness that appears out of nowhere. And worst of all, it comes as a deep sadness that has no clear source, only a weight that grows heavier with time. That's what we're here to face, openly, without filters or softeners. We're going to look directly at this pattern, the one where you live for others while slowly fading from your own life. We'll explore what Carl Jung uncovered about the delicate, often strained relationship between the ego, the mask you wear, and the depths of your unconscious. And more than that, we'll ask a question most people avoid. What if this relentless urge to please isn't just a personality quirk? What if it's a warning sign, an internal red flag that you've lost touch with who you really are? This conversation might feel like a mirror or a punch to the chest, but if you're still here, it's probably because some part of you already knows you can't keep living like this. So take a breath, a real one, because the journey ahead may challenge everything you thought you understood about yourself. This programming didn't start yesterday. It began early, when you were still learning how to be a person. You were told to behave, to make yourself smaller so others wouldn't feel discomfort. You were taught to hide the messy emotions, to tame your instincts, to smile even when you were collapsing inside. And over time, without even noticing, you built a version of yourself that felt safer, more acceptable, more convenient. That version, the one that people liked, trusted, leaned on, that became your default. Jung gave it a name, the persona. It's not your enemy. In fact, it serves a vital role. The persona helps you function in society. It gives you a way to relate, to participate, to belong. You need it, but only as long as you remember it's a mask. The real danger begins when you start to believe the act, when the smile stays even when you're furious, when you nod even though you disagree, when you help because it's expected, not because your heart is in it. And slowly, that curated character begins to take over. You become the one who never complains, the one who's always nice, always helpful, always calm, even when chaos brews beneath your skin. Because somewhere along the way, you started performing so well that even you forgot it was a performance. Here's the truth. Each time you fake a smile when you're hurting, each time you stay quiet to avoid a fight, each time you say, "it's fine," when your whole body knows it's not, something inside you goes silent, not loudly, not all at once, but subtly, like a dimmer switch slowly turning down the light. The more you deny what you feel, the more those denials begin to stack up, layer upon layer, crack upon crack, until eventually something starts to disappear, not on the outside, but within. You forget what you actually want. You stop recognizing your own voice. Desire becomes foggy. Decisions feel automatic. Your life begins to orbit around expectations, not your values, not your truth, but what keeps everything peaceful. And that's where the persona, once helpful, becomes dangerous. It no longer serves you. It traps you. You're still functioning. You're still showing up. You might even be thriving in the eyes of others. They tell you you're doing great, that you're strong, reliable, put together, but none of them see what's dying behind the mask, because somewhere along the way, the mask stopped being something you wore and started becoming your skin. And now you're stuck in a painful paradox. How do you peel off something the world has come to admire, something you built your life around, without losing the very foundation you stand on? That's the cruel part. It all looks fine, but your inner world is slowly unraveling, quietly. So you have to ask, is it worth it? Is this image, this carefully curated version of you, worth the cost of never really being yourself? How many times have you bitten your tongue to keep things smooth? How often have you nodded yes and then hated yourself for it? How many smiles have you forced while something in you was screaming? No matter how polished, how useful, how loved the persona becomes, it was never meant to lead your life. It was never supposed to be the master, only the mask. When you cling too tightly to the role you've been playing, you begin to fade into it, not as a character, but as a shadow of yourself. And little by little, the tether to your soul, the living pulse of who you are, begins to loosen. At first, you might not notice. You keep moving, keep doing, keep smiling, but something deep within you starts to stir. It resists, it protests, it wants out. That inner friction has a name, inner conflict. It's what happens when the surface of your life no longer reflects your inner world. When your actions are scripted, but your heart wants to go off script. When your mouth says yes, but your spirit is screaming no. This isn't just psychological discomfort. It's a quiet war. And the battlefield, it's invisible. On one side stands your ego, the part of you that keeps the world running smoothly. It wants stability, control, approval, belonging. It's the internal manager that tries to keep the persona polished and predictable. It fears rejection, chaos, exposure. It's not evil. It's just trying to protect you. But on the other side is something deeper, older, wilder, more honest. You're unconscious. And unlike the ego, it doesn't play by society's rules. It doesn't care about fitting in or keeping the peace. It cares about the truth, your truth. So while your ego keeps smoothing over cracks, the unconscious begins to react, not with words, but with signals. You start feeling off, restless, sad for no reason. You snap over little things. You wake up tired. You smile, but feel hollow. These symptoms aren't weaknesses. They're messages, faint signals from the parts of you that have been ignored for too long. Carl Jung described it like this. When the ego strays too far from your total self, the unconscious pushes back. It tries to rebalance, to restore integrity. And the more you try to maintain appearances, keep things light, stay agreeable, avoid discomfort, the more the unconscious rises. It sends dreams, mood swings, aches, unexplained reactions. It releases what Jung called the shadow, the repressed parts of your psyche that don't disappear. They just find other ways to come out. That's why sometimes, without knowing why, you self-sabotage, you overreact, you withdraw, you numb out, not because you're broken, but because your soul is tired of being ignored. This constant inner tug-of-war breeds tension. You try to hold everything together, but cracks still form. You show up, you say the right things, you wear the mask, but deep down, there's resentment, exhaustion, a quiet rage, and it's not directed at others, it's aimed at yourself, because every time you abandon what you feel for the sake of approval, you betray something sacred within you, and that betrayal doesn't hurt all at once. It accumulates, it drains you, It hollows you. It slowly wears down your connection to your own vitality. From the outside, you look composed, productive, thoughtful, kind, but inside, you've forgotten how to feel anything real. You just know that something's wrong, and eventually, pretending won't be enough. You'll try to shake it off, call it a phase, but deep down, you'll feel it. The cost of adapting has become too high, because a life without authenticity, without depth or direction, is not a life at all. It's a performance, but there's a reason this pattern exists. And for some people, the urge to please runs even deeper. There are those who feel guilty for having needs, who shrink themselves without realizing it, who were shaped to be what others wanted and lost track of what they wanted along the way. Jung recognized this. He identified a psychological type especially prone to this kind of self-erasure. And in the next part, we'll explore whether this description fits you and how understanding it might be your first step toward breaking free. Not all of us experience the world the same way. Carl Jung taught that each person carries a distinct inner blueprint, a psychological makeup shaped by deep-rooted functions and attitudes. This inner architecture determines how we interpret the world, make choices, and navigate relationships. And among these inner types, there's one that's especially vulnerable when it comes to self-sacrifice, the feeling-oriented extrovert. For this type, connection isn't just something they enjoy, it's something they depend on. Being in sync with others, sensing harmony in the room, knowing they're liked, these aren't luxuries. They're forms of survival. Their emotional radar is always on. They walk into a space and instantly sense what others feel, think, and need. And without even realizing it, they shift themselves accordingly, softening their voice, nodding in agreement, offering comfort, hiding their discomfort. Their attention is outward, not inward. They build their identity through reflection, through the gaze of others, the smiles they receive, the warmth of being appreciated. Their sense of worth becomes entangled in the approval they earn. On the surface, this looks like empathy, like generosity, and often it is. But when this way of relating becomes automatic, when it's used to avoid tension, avoid disapproval, avoid rejection, it begins to hollow them out. Because this type is constantly scanning for what others want, they forget to ask what they want. Their moral compass starts pointing away from their center, always aligning with external values, even when those values go against their deeper truths. So they nod along with ideas they don't believe in, stay in relationships that drain them, say yes to things that make them sick inside, all just to keep their image intact. For them, being liked feels like being loved. Being needed feels like being valuable. And when they're not useful, not sweet, not available, they feel invisible, like they don't exist. It becomes a loop, a subconscious pattern, not because they're weak, but because they've never been shown another way. They live in a mode of performance, addicted to being accepted. And perhaps the most dangerous part, they don't even realize they're disappearing because the world applauds them for it, and they've mistaken that applause for love. But let's be clear, this pattern doesn't belong only to one type of person. You don't have to be an emotional extrovert to fall into it. Most of us, at one point or another, have made ourselves smaller to keep the peace. You say yes to avoid disappointment. You stay quiet to dodge judgment. You downplay your pain so others stay comfortable. And in those moments, even the smallest ones, you're following the same inner script, that being liked is safer than being real. But this inner compromise, it adds up. And your unconscious, it notices. It doesn't send you messages in bold letters. It doesn't leave notes on your desk or whisper clearly in your ear. Instead, it speaks in riddles, through dreams, discomforts, compulsions, and strange emotional storms that seem to come out of nowhere. It begins to show you all the truths you've been trying not to see. This next part of the journey is about learning to recognize those signs, those quiet alarms from deep within. The unconscious doesn't use logic or language. It uses metaphor, sensation, symbol, and the more you abandon your truth, the more loudly it begins to respond. You'll see it in your sleep. You dream of being naked in public, exposed, vulnerable, stripped of your mask. You're running but can't escape, chased by something you've buried. You try to speak but no one hears, your voice stifled, your will locked away. You find yourself trapped, unable to move, your soul confined in a life that no longer feels like your own. And it doesn't end with dreams. Your body joins the protest, aches without reason, fatigue without cause, breathlessness that feels like drowning, insomnia that won't let you rest. Your body, an extension of your psyche, starts to scream in the only way it can. And when even that isn't enough to get your attention, the unconscious moves to behavior. You scroll mindlessly, shop without thinking, eat when you're not hungry, fill your time with distractions. Because if you sit in the silence too long, you might hear something, and you're afraid of what you'll hear. Because facing the truth means facing the parts of your life you built out of fear, not desire. It means acknowledging that the version of you the world knows might be a costume. It means realizing that many of your decisions were shaped not by freedom, but by fear. Fear of being unloved, fear of letting others down, fear of being left. But ignoring these inner messages doesn't make them go away. It makes them louder, because your soul wasn't made to live in fragments. The human psyche can only tolerate dishonesty for so long before it pushes back hard. Carl Jung called this the balancing force of the unconscious. When the ego drifts too far from the truth, when you spend all your time accommodating, avoiding, suppressing, the unconscious doesn't wait quietly. It pushes in the opposite direction, through intense dreams, through unexpected urges, through emotional breakdowns that feel like everything is falling apart. But here's the paradox. This collapse, painful as it is, carries the seed of your healing, because real change doesn't begin with comfort. It begins when the structures you built to survive no longer work. And that's where the path of transformation begins, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Jung called this process individuation, and it is the heart of everything you've been longing for. We'll talk more about that in the next part, because individuation isn't a luxury, it's a psychological necessity. It's what begins when pretending becomes unbearable, and the craving for authenticity finally outweighs the need to be liked. And now, we reach the edge of something important, the place where endings meet beginnings, where a difficult truth stops being something to fear and starts becoming something that frees you. This part, the one you're in right now, may feel strange. There's relief perhaps, but also unease, a heaviness that lingers under the inside, because deep down, you know this isn't just a concept anymore. Something inside you has shifted, and once that happens, you can't unknow what's been revealed. You've seen through the performance. You've tasted the hollowness of approval. You've touched the ache of your own absence. And maybe for the first time, you realize you didn't come here to impress anyone. You didn't arrive on this earth to wear masks, play roles, and keep quiet while your soul begs to be heard. You're here to live in alignment, to tell the truth, even when your voice shakes, to stand where you are, even when others don't clap, to become whole, even if it costs you the life you built to be liked. Because what you lose in this process was never truly yours, and what you gain is everything. The persona can offer protection, sure. It can help you function, belong, fit in, but it will never bring you peace. Peace doesn't come from the surface. It doesn't come from how you look, what you say, or how well you meet expectations. It comes from within, when what you feel, believe, and live finally stop contradicting each other. That inner coherence, that's peace, that's power. And it only becomes possible the moment you decide, I won't betray myself anymore. Freedom doesn't arrive when the world finally approves of you. It begins when you do, when you can stand before the mirror without filters or roles and whisper, I've got you, I won't leave you behind again. That single promise, to stand by yourself, is a quiet revolution. It doesn't scream. It unfolds in moments, in subtle choices, in the questions you start asking, in a conversation like this one. So if something in this spoke to your soul, don't let it pass you by. Name it, write it, let it echo in your own words. Say what stirred, say what hurt, say what opened, because in naming it, you begin to reclaim it. This is just the first step. There's more waiting for you, more depth, more clarity, more truth. And once you begin the journey inward, you don't stop, you deepen. So keep going, keep listening, keep choosing truth over comfort, alignment over image, self-connection over approval, because the truth will set you free, but only if you're brave enough to follow it all the way home. You ever wonder how everyone else seems fine, while you're just trying not to fall apart in public? You smile, you function, but deep down, you're exhausted from pretending you don't feel everything too deeply, like you were born with no skin around your heart. You ever sit in a room full of people and still feel like you're drowning? Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow, quiet collapse behind the eyes. You laugh, you nod, you play the part, but inside, you're folding, silently, because no one can see how hard you're trying to look unshaken. You've dreamed of it, haven't you? To be unbreakable, untouchable, unaffected by their silence, their absence, their blade-edged words disguised as honesty. You fantasized about not caring, not flinching, not bleeding every time someone forgets how to hold you gently, but you do. You bleed, even when no one sees it, especially then, because the pressure isn't just out there, it's inside. A constant performance for an audience that never claps. You're tired, not just in your bones, but in that quiet place beneath the smile, the place no one visits unless they're hurting too. You tell yourself, if I could just stop feeling, if I could just stop caring, then maybe I'd be free. But that's the trap. Numbing isn't freedom. Avoidance isn't peace. It's self-abandonment, dressed up as survival. Stay with me. Carl Jung once said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. But how can you choose when your hands are still trembling from holding back the scream for so many years? Here's the part no one says out loud. You don't suffer because people are cruel. You suffer because you believed you had to be strong to be loved. You suffer because somewhere along the line, you confuse stillness with safety, distance with control, and pain with punishment. Let that sink in. What they did, that betrayal, that rejection, was a spark, but the explosion was already waiting inside you. Old wounds disguised as personality traits, unmet needs you learned to call independence, loneliness you wrapped in logic. You didn't grow cold, you grew careful. You didn't become distant, you became a curator of who gets to see the real you. And maybe no one ever really has. Let's go deeper. The truth is, you've been trying to master a world you were never meant to control. You thought if you could be perfect enough, quiet enough, strong enough, then maybe you wouldn't be abandoned again. But Jung would call this the shadow, the parts of you buried to be accepted, the child who still weeps behind your adult mask. And until you face that part, until you hold it without flinching, you'll keep living as a reaction to pain you never deserved but kept making your identity. This isn't weakness. This is being human in a world that doesn't wait for healing. And if you're here, reading this, feeling this, it means you're already waking up. Not to the world, but to yourself. You've suffered enough in silence. Let it be the start, not of armor, but of integration. Not numbness, but awareness. You don't need to become untouchable. You just need to become whole. And wholeness has room for the bleeding. You're still trying to be good enough, smart enough, strong enough, understanding enough, as if that guarantees that no one will hurt you. But pain doesn't ask if you've done everything right. It arrives anyway, because control is a beautiful illusion. And the more tightly you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers. You live in tension, hypervigilant, trying to predict the next betrayal before it happens, trying to avoid the next loss before it hits you. But all that effort, it's not saving you, it's exhausting you. You ask, how do I stop suffering? The answer isn't more protection, it's less resistance, not more control, more awareness. Because as long as you believe that they need to change so you can feel peace, you are not free. You're still a puppet on the strings of someone else's behavior. Your freedom begins the moment you realize Nothing from the outside can break you unless it echoes what already lives inside you. And that's where the real battle is. Not in your relationships, not in the world, but in the part of you that hides from your own reflection. The unconscious, the place where memories go to rot, where shame grows teeth, where the child you once were still waits to be seen. Jung warned us, what you do not make conscious will rule your life, and you will call it fate. Stay with me. You keep calling it bad timing, bad luck, coincidence. But look deeper, the pain that keeps finding you. It's not random. That sudden rage that feels too big for the moment. That heaviness that shows up in a room full of laughter. That sadness you can't trace back to anything specific. These are not flaws. They're messages from within, from the parts of you you silenced so you could be loved, from the wounds you never named, from the truths you weren't allowed to feel. Jung called this the shadow, and it's not just darkness. It's disowned power, buried pain, forgotten need. You wonder, why do certain words destroy me when they don't even faze someone else? Because they hit what's still raw, still alive. And if it's still alive, you haven't healed it. You've just hidden it, tucked it under the rug of your personality, and now you keep tripping over it. Jung said, we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. So ask yourself, how long have you been oppressing yourself in the name of being okay? You don't heal by silence. You don't grow by repression, because the unconscious doesn't vanish when ignored. It becomes louder. It shows up as the same relationship with a different face, as self-sabotage when things go too well, as anxiety in moments that should feel safe. This isn't misfortune. It's your unconscious trying to wake you up, but you insist on sleeping. You say you want peace. You say you want to stop hurting. Then stop running from what lives inside you. Because as long as you don't know you're unconscious, you will always be reacting, not choosing. You will be a puppet dangling from strings you can't even see, dancing to emotions that feel like yours, but were planted long before you could name them. And the more you try to guard yourself from outside harm, the more exposed you become to the storms inside. The ones you pretend aren't there, but there is a way out. And it's not about defense. It's not about becoming harder, colder, quieter. It's about becoming aware. Because true strength, unshakable strength, doesn't come from resistance. It comes from recognition. You don't become untouchable by turning away. You become untouchable by turning inward, by knowing yourself so fully that no wound has the power to define you anymore. Let's continue. Most people think the safest way to live is behind walls. They call it boundaries, but really, it's fear dressed up as wisdom. So they build silence around their heart. They wear sarcasm like armor, and they tell themselves, I don't care anymore. Nothing gets to me. I'm over it. But inside, they are still bleeding, still corroding from the feelings they were never taught how to hold. Because the problem was never that you felt too much. The problem was that you didn't understand what you were feeling or why. And that happens to those who do not yet know themselves. Jung once said, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but when touching a human soul, be just another human soul, and the soul you've buried under perfection and detachment and cold composure is still in there, still waiting to be seen, to be heard. Emotional strength has nothing to do with pretending you're fine. It's not about ignoring pain, avoiding conflict, or pretending you're above it all. It's about integration. It's about bringing your broken parts into the light, holding them, not judging them. You don't become unshakable by shutting out the world. You become unshakable when you realize no one can break what you've already made peace with. When you sit with your shadow, your fears, your flaws, your shame, they lose their grip. You stop reacting. You start observing. You begin choosing. And that is what real freedom tastes like. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming not what the world wants, not what your parents expected, not what your trauma molded, but who you are when both light and shadow are allowed to exist in the same breath. Individuation is not perfection. It is not improvement. It is wholeness. You don't need to become better. You need to become real. Here's the secret no one told you. The more you run from pain, the more it chases you. The more you try not to feel, the more fragile you become. But when you turn toward it, when you face the wound, hold it, let it breathe, it stops defining you, because nothing outside you can dismantle what you've already accepted within. But this path, it requires courage. Not the loud kind, not the kind that screams, the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, feel this, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, because somewhere in that pain is the key. Not a curse, a doorway. And in the next part, we'll step through it. Because suffering, when seen clearly, isn't the enemy. It's the invitation you've been avoiding. Let's dive deeper. And this time, without fear. You learned to hate pain before you could spell your name. They told you, don't cry, be strong, shake it off, get over it. So you did. You ran, you numbed. You buried it all under performance and politeness. But pain doesn't vanish when you ignore it. It just waits, it morphs. And when it comes back, it wears new faces. Anxiety, irritability, boredom, self-destruction with no clear cause. You don't even know why. You just feel hollow, like something is trying to speak through you, but you've forgotten the language. Because ignored pain doesn't disappear. It digs tunnels, quietly, patiently, until one day everything collapses under the weight of what you never let yourself feel. Jung didn't see pain as a failure. He saw it as a message, the language of the soul. He said, depression is like a lady in black. If she appears, don't shoo her away. Invite her in, offer her coffee, and listen. But you don't listen. You scroll, you binge, you stay busy, you fake the laugh, you power through. But somewhere in that silence, a question waits. What is this pain trying to tell you? Suffering isn't your enemy. It's the signal that you're still split. There's a part of you that's aching to evolve, and another clinging to comfort, to familiarity, to the illusion of control. This friction is the birthplace of pain, because change hurts, growth hurts, letting go hurts, letting go of stories you've told yourself, letting go of who you had to be to survive. It's a mourning, an internal death, but in that ruin, a rebirth. When the image you try to protect finally crumbles, you meet the part of you that never needed protecting in the first place, without the armor, without the applause, without the lies. And in that moment, suffering becomes sacred, because it brings you to your knees in front of the only one who can set you free. You. Jung understood this. Suffering is not dysfunction. It is initiation. It is not the end. It is the threshold. But most people don't make it across. They turn back. They call it healing after one good week, but not you. If you're still here, you're not here to surface. You're here to dive. And in the next part, we step into the crossing itself, the descent into the dark that leads, not to despair, but to liberation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you are, but to do that, you must first unbecome what told to be. And that hurts deeper than any breakup, because you begin to see how much of your identity was built on fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being alone, fear of disappointing them. You are not your accolades. You are not your trauma. You are not the version of yourself you created to feel worthy of love. All of that was survival. But surviving is not the same as living. Individuation is the soul's whisper. There's more. It's the unconscious shoving everything you've hidden in the basement to the surface. And it is not gentle. Jung wrote that to individuate, you must dissolve the persona, the mask you wear to function in society. And that means tearing off your own skin to find out what's real underneath. This is how you become untouchable. Not by becoming numb, not by building walls, but because you've already faced the fire. You've already looked into the eyes of your shame, your neediness, your rage, and said, I see you, and you no longer decide who I am. That is clarity. That is power. Not the kind that seeks applause, but the kind that doesn't need it. You stop chasing love You stop winning arguments. You stop pretending because you know who you are, and no one can take that away from you. Real emotional armor is not a shield. It is a spine. It is the quiet, steady weight of knowing your shadows and walking forward anyway. You still feel pain, but it doesn't define you anymore. You still get hurt, but you don't vanish inside of it, because somewhere along the way, you stopped reacting and started remembering who you are. You began moving differently, less noise, more presence, not at the surface, but at the root, and roots don't grow where it's crowded. This depth, this grounded stillness, comes with a cost. Not drama, not tragedy, but a soft, slow distance, loneliness, not because you are unloved, but because few have chosen to meet themselves. You start to see how many people are still wearing masks so tight they forget there's a face underneath. You try to stay close, you try to hold on, but the deeper you go, the harder it is to explain what can only be felt. So you let go, not from pride, not from superiority, but because you've outgrown the rooms you once used to shrink inside. Stay with me. This is where the path sharpens. This is where consciousness becomes your compass. Not strength, not resistance, but awareness. Crystal clear, because clarity is the only shield that doesn't rust. And now that you've made it this far, there's something you need to hear. No external armor will protect if you keep falling asleep to what's happening inside. The words will still cut. The losses will still ache. The betrayals will still sting. Until you wake up, not once, but again and again. Awakening isn't a moment. It's a daily decision to meet yourself in the mirror without flinching, to feel the ache without turning it into a war, to take full responsibility for what lives inside you, even when it hurts, even when it was never your fault. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists, but what you accept transforms." And you've been resisting your whole life. The fear of not being enough, the wound of not being chosen, the hollow echo of being misunderstood, the weight of pretending to be okay. So you hid, you overperformed, you tried to perfect your way out of pain, but perfection is a mask with no air behind it. And now, you're tired, not from life, but from the performance. But listen closely. True emotional immunity doesn't come from becoming hard. It comes from becoming whole, not from armoring up, but from softening into yourself so fully that nothing on the outside can shake what's already rooted within. Because once you understand your own patterns, your own wounds, your own storm, other people stop having power over your weather. You still feel, but you don't drown. You still break, but you don't scatter. And that changes everything. You don't protect yourself by avoiding life. You protect yourself by going deeper into it. The surface gets rocked by every wave, but beneath that, in the quiet, there is power, there is peace, and that is where you're going. When you begin to live from that space, not pretending, not performing, but simply being, the world can still try to strike you, but it doesn't know where to hit anymore. Because what was once a wound is now a scar, and a scar is proof you survived. If this felt like truth wrapped in silence, type below, "I see myself now." Let's begin a quiet movement, not of people pretending to be strong, but of people finally choosing to be whole. And don't stop here. The next video is part of this same unfolding. Real transformation doesn't happen at the first glimpse of light. It happens when you choose to keep walking through the dark. I'll meet you there. It always begins the same way. Not with love, not even with recognition, but with possibility. She looks at you, not to see you, but to imagine you, to imagine who you could be. You'll feel it in her gaze, not warmth, not presence, but projection. You think it's connection, but it's calculation. You're not being held, you're being scanned, measured, outlined like an empty figure in a coloring book she's been carrying since girlhood. And you're not the story, you're the placeholder. Carl Jung saw this pattern long before dating coaches turned psychology into clickbait. He didn't speak with charm, He spoke with the clarity of a man who spent decades knee-deep in the human shadow. He named the force you feel, but can't explain. In every woman, there's an inner image, a masculine shape, not a man, but an ideal, a voice, a myth. He called it the animus, and when it's undeveloped, unexamined, or infected by wounds, it doesn't whisper, it commands. She may not know she's projecting. Most never do, but you'll know by the pressure, by how quickly you're praised, and how suddenly you're replaced. You believed you were chosen, but it wasn't you. It was the echo of a childhood daydream she's been editing for years. You were simply cast in the role of the one who finally understands, until you didn't, until you said no, until you showed a flaw she hadn't scripted, and suddenly, the story must go on, with or without you. New actor, same fantasy. The immature animus doesn't want partnership. It wants power. Not power over the world, but over its own pain. And when that pain isn't healed, it gets projected onto you. So when she criticizes, moralizes, interrupts, when she debates not to understand but to dominate, know this: you're no longer speaking to her. You're speaking to the voice inside her, the one that sounds like certainty but lives in fear. This isn't about villainizing women. It's about recognizing patterns you were never taught to name. You were taught to celebrate being wanted, but not to question what part of you is being wanted. Is it your truth or your usefulness? She told you you were different, that you were the first to make her feel this way. But if you look closely, you'll see the signs, the recycled lines, the choreographed pain, the script. And when it ends, as it always does, you'll be left blinking, wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth. You didn't fail her. You just stopped fitting the mask, and she wasn't ready to see what was underneath. Jung warned that the only way out of this psychological theater is through what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole within yourself, not through women, not through approval, but through facing the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are beneath the layers you've learned to perform. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most men never even begin that journey. You've been trained, conditioned even, to chase validation, to see yourself through someone else's eyes, to outsource your sense of worth to the whims of attraction. And as long as you do, you'll keep stepping into the same role, again and again, each time hoping that maybe this performance will be enough, that maybe this time the applause will last. But it never does, because you're not playing you, you're playing what you think she wants. And no one respects a man who doesn't even respect his own edges. Individuation isn't glamorous. It isn't spiritual glitter or soft meditations. It's brutal. It will break you open. It will confront you with the weak parts, the hidden parts, the fractured voices you've buried beneath a lifetime of pretending to be fine. It demands that you stop blaming women for not seeing you and start asking why you never really saw yourself. Because here's what Jung understood, and what most men today are terrified to face. You don't become a man by being chosen. You become a man by choosing yourself, not in rebellion, not in bitterness, but in truth. You don't earn worth through affection. You embody it by standing alone, clear-eyed, rooted, self-contained. A man who has faced his own unconscious cannot be seduced by projection. He doesn't need to be worshipped, understood, or completed, because he is no longer a puppet. He is the author. Jung observed that the real tragedy of the modern man isn't that he's overlooked, it's that he's willing to become anything just to be accepted. You call it compromise. You call it commitment. You call it love. But Jung had a different word for it: self-betrayal. Because every time you shapeshift to please, every time you soften your truth to avoid rejection, you betray the very core of your being. And eventually, the betrayal becomes so practiced, it feels like personality. You lose track of where the act ends, and you begin. Jung warned that men who ignore their own psychic development become slaves to the feminine projection, bending themselves like wet clay into the forms demanded by women who themselves are still lost in fantasy. You stop being real. You become agreeable. You become convenient. You become nothing. And women, whether they can name it or not, feel this. They feel the emptiness behind your smile. They feel the performance, even when it's polished. And what you thought would make her stay, your obedience, your predictability, your unwavering devotion, becomes the very thing that dries up her desire. Why? Because the feminine, when it is instinctual and alive, is not drawn to comfort. It's drawn to mystery, to tension, to the man who does not fit neatly into her blueprint. Jung taught that the feminine doesn't crave safety. It craves life, vitality, a man she cannot fully decode. The moment you make yourself fully known, without edges, without boundaries, without resistance, you don't become more lovable. You become invisible. You become replaceable. And this is the paradox that traps most men. You fear being alone more than you fear being false. You would rather vanish inside a lie than feel the cold wind of solitude. You'd rather be tolerated than risk not being chosen. You'd rather be useful than sovereign. And so you cling, you contort, you become a reflection of what you think will keep her. And in doing so, you vanish. But Jung taught that until a man embraces aloneness, until he confronts the silence within him, he will never be whole. He wrote that individuation is not for the faint-hearted. It requires a kind of death, a burning away of the false self, a funeral for every version of you that existed only to be liked. And that death isn't metaphor. It's cellular, it's psychic, it's spiritual. The ego doesn't go quietly. It screams, it bargains, it begs. But if you stay the course, something honest begins to rise. And here's what no one wants to say out loud. Individuation is lonely. Terrifyingly so. Not because you're unloved, but because you begin to see. You begin to recognize the performance in others. You hear the scripts. You sense the masks. You watch people clinging to identities that were handed to them, not chosen. You notice the avoidance, the distraction, the way everyone is trying so hard to look alive, but very few have actually met themselves. You see the way people smile with their mouths but ache behind their eyes. You see the games, the self-deception, the quiet desperation dressed up in success and certainty. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And when you try to share what you see, when you begin to speak from this clarity, from this place of hard-won vision, they mock you. They call you cold, arrogant, detached. They accuse you of being the problem, of overthinking, of being too much. But you're not the problem. You're the mirror. And people hate the mirror when it reflects something they've spent their whole lives avoiding. Jung knew this intimately. He spent decades sitting across from people who were brilliant on the surface, rational, kind, well-adjusted, but hollow beneath. People who had done everything except the one thing that mattered, confronting their own shadow, the parts of themselves they exiled, the truths they couldn't bear to name, the shame that whispered beneath every performance of, "I'm fine." And when it came to women, Jung didn't tread lightly. He warned that many were raised in cultures that encouraged disconnection from the shadow, rewarded them for remaining innocent, emotional, intuitive, whole, just as they were. But wholeness without confrontation is not strength, it's denial. Jung didn't romanticize this idea of innate feminine purity. In fact, he challenged it. He wrote that the greatest psychic danger to women wasn't oppression. It was unconscious identification with the animus, the masculine inner voice that speaks not from wisdom, but from unexamined rigidity. It's the voice that dominates conversations, moralizes in relationships, and disguises insecurity as superiority. And if a woman fails to face this force, to meet it, question it, integrate it, she doesn't escape it. She becomes its vessel. And then, without even realizing, she projects it onto every man she encounters. He becomes the battleground. He becomes the enemy she cannot name. And you, standing there trying to love her, become the target of a war that has nothing to do with you. But of course, you don't know this at first. You think you're her savior, the one who'll finally get her, the one who'll prove that not all men are the same. So you try harder, you love louder, you perform better, you sacrifice deeper, all the while believing that if you can just be good enough, real enough, present enough, she'll finally see you. But that's not how projection works. Jung warned, projection is a thief. It robs you of the truth and replaces it with a fantasy. And no matter how noble your intentions, you cannot love someone out of their illusions, because illusions are safer than reality, safer than intimacy, safer than seeing themselves. So you both fall into the same pattern, the same tragedy. She blames you for breaking the spell. You blame her for withdrawing the love that once felt unconditional. Neither of you understands that the entire relationship was built on shadow. Hers, yours, both. And here's the cruelest irony of all. The same woman who once saw you as her savior will, in time, turn on you. Not because you failed her, but because you failed to maintain the illusion. You didn't betray her. You simply stepped out of character. You stopped being the fantasy. And to someone who isn't conscious of their projections, that feels like betrayal. That feels like war. She won't even know she's doing it. She'll rewrite the story in her head. She'll remember you as cold, distant, unreliable, not because it's true, but because it has to be true, because the alternative is too painful. To admit she was never in love with you, only with what you represented. And this is what Jung called inevitable psychological betrayal. What happens when two people refuse to take responsibility for their own inner landscapes? You didn't lie to her. You didn't trick her. You simply couldn't become the imaginary man she needed you to be in order to avoid facing herself. You were never him. And that is what she cannot forgive. Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And nowhere is this more true than in love. Because love, real love, not the fantasy, not the performance, is the mirror that doesn't blink. It shows you what you are and what you are not. And that is terrifying to anyone still clinging to the script they were handed before they even knew how to write their own name. Both men and women walk into relationships not as whole beings, but as walking projections, haunted by ghosts they've never named, dragging behind them a trail of unmet needs, unspoken fears, and unresolved wounds from childhood. They don't enter love, they enter reenactment. You call it chemistry, you call it fate, you call it finally finding the one, but Jung called it what it truly is: possession, a takeover of the psyche by the unconscious, a seduction not by the other, but by the idea of the other. And like a man hypnotized, you follow the same path, convinced that this time it will be different, but it never is, because the pattern doesn't change until you do. And that only happens when you're willing to ask the most brutal question a man can ask himself. What if I'm the one responsible for all of this? You want to blame her. Of course you do. You want to call her manipulative. Say she misled you. Say she changed. You want to list every moment she confused you, disappointed you, left you feeling disposable. But Jung wouldn't let you off that easy. He would look at you, not with judgment, but with surgical precision, and ask, why did you let yourself be chosen by that woman in the first place? Why did you ignore your gut? Why did you overlook the red flags? Why did you hand over your sense of worth like it was hers to carry? You see, the man who refuses to confront his own inner feminine, his anima, is forever doomed to project her onto every woman he meets. He doesn't fall in love with the woman. He falls in love with the missing part of himself that he has not yet integrated. And then he clings to her, idolizes her, and eventually resents her for failing to complete him. You are not a victim. You are a volunteer. You chose the mask. You chose the performance. You chose to be the actor in someone else's dream, because facing your own emptiness, your own lack of identity, your own shapelessness was more terrifying than disappearing inside her fantasy. And here's where most men check out. This is where they stop listening. Because this is where the comfort ends and the responsibility begins. Jung didn't hand out formulas. He didn't sell 10-step solutions or promise dominance over women. He offered something far more dangerous: the call to face yourself without flinching, to sit in silence, to watch your illusions crack, to feel the panic rise when the voice in your head tells you that you are nothing without her, and to sit with that voice until it finally dies. And it will fight. That voice will thrash and beg. It will whisper that you're unworthy, that you're incomplete, that you are only half of a whole, and that wholeness lies in her eyes, her touch, her approval. It will tell you that no man can exist without feminine affirmation. But Jung's work whispers something far more dangerous. It whispers that the man who can stand, truly stand, without her, without applause, without being needed, without performing, is the man who is finally free, free from illusion, free from dependency, free from the exhausting tyranny of being someone else's idea of a man. And when you reach that place, you don't become cold. You don't become cruel. You become real. You become rooted, solid, present. You stop asking to be seen. You see yourself. And ironically, paradoxically, that's when women will feel the most drawn to you, not because you chase them, not because you impress them, but because you don't need them. Your presence is no longer a performance. It's a signal. And it says, I am here. I am whole. I am not asking you to complete me. And that is what magnetizes the feminine, not your perfection, but your groundedness. And you'll smile, not from arrogance, not from detachment, but from a quiet understanding, because you'll finally know she, too, is on her own journey, her own path of awakening, her own dance with projection, shadow, and truth. And you will no longer need to save her or be saved by her, that she must face her own animus, that she must wake from her own illusions. That is her work, not yours. You can't do it for her. You can't save her from the war inside her own psyche. No matter how much you love her, no matter how badly you want to, you can hold space, but you cannot carry her. And that's where most men stumble. They confuse love with rescue, presence with fixing. But Jung knew better. He didn't become a lighthouse by chasing ships. He simply stood where he was, grounded in truth, radiating clarity. That's all you can do. Walk your own path so relentlessly, so fearlessly, that your very presence becomes a mirror, one that reflects the raw, unedited truth to anyone brave enough to look. Most won't. Most will flinch, look away, curse you for showing them something they're not ready to see. But a few, a rare, awakened few, will thank you for it. And that, my friend, is the difference between being loved for the role you play and being respected for the man you've become. And when that moment finally lands, when you realize you no longer need to perform, something strange will begin to happen. You'll notice how uncomfortable your presence makes people. You won't even have to speak. They'll feel it. They'll feel the weight of your being, the stillness in your posture, the clarity in your eyes, and it will unsettle them, not because you become dangerous, but because you become unpredictable. You no longer fit inside their categories. You're no longer playing the game. Jung warned that the individuated man is never embraced by society. He's feared, misunderstood, labeled as arrogant, cold, aloof. But the truth, the part that really threatens them, is that you've become unbuyable, untouchable, unmanipulable, because you no longer need the approval that once controlled you. And here's where it gets almost comedic. The very people who once clung to your every word, the ones who sought your validation, your affection, your availability, will begin to resent you for not needing theirs. They'll feel abandoned, though you've never left. They'll call you emotionally unavailable, though you've never been more present. They'll say you're too in your head, too serious, too much. But what they really mean, though they'll never admit it, is that they can no longer control you. You've stepped off their stage. You've stopped reading from their script. And without the script, they don't know what to do with you, because you've stopped being a character and started being a man. Jung once joked that the gods had become diseases, that what ancient cultures called divine possession, we now call neurosis. And he wasn't being cute. He was pointing at something modern men still don't understand, that every unresolved archetype, every unlived truth, every unacknowledged wound, when denied long enough, festers into pathology. Make no mistake, the men most infected by this are not the cold ones, not the aggressive ones, but the romantics, the desperate, the ones who believe she is everything. You think it's noble when you say, "I'd do anything for her." You think it's love when you say, "She's my world." But Jung would shake his head. He'd see it for what it is: abandonment of self disguised as devotion. Because what you call love is often nothing more than your refusal to carry your own soul. It's easier to place it in her hands, to make her the carrier of your meaning, your hope, your identity. Because if she holds it, you don't have to. If she becomes your purpose, you don't need to find your own. And that's not love. That's dependency. That's projection. That's spiritual laziness dressed up in poetic language. You've outsourced your depth, and now you fear what will happen when she puts it down. But here's the brutal twist. When she finally realizes she was never meant to carry your soul, she will drop it. Not out of cruelty, not out of betrayal, but because she must. No woman, no matter how devoted, no matter how intuitive, no matter how much she loves you, can hold the weight of a man who refuses to hold himself. And when she drops it, you'll feel it like a death. The illusion will collapse, and with it, the fantasy that someone else was supposed to do the work for you. But that pain, sharp as it is also your liberation, because in that moment, you finally stand face to face with the truth that the work of becoming a man was never hers to do. It was always yours. And in that raw clarity, with the wreckage of the illusion at your feet, you have two choices. You can lash out. You can call her names. You can run to the echo chambers filled with bitter men who point fingers, mock women, and wallow in their blame like broken boys masquerading as warriors. Or you can do what Jung would have demanded of you. You can go inward. You can begin the lonely, terrifying, necessary work of becoming whole. Not for her, not to win, not to impress, but because you are the one who has been waiting for you all along. Because the truth is, and it's a truth most will spend their lives avoiding, the woman you've been searching for out there is a reflection of the part of yourself you've abandoned. Until you reclaim her, until you meet your own inner feminine, not as weakness, but as the lost half of your soul. Every relationship will be a performance. Every "I love you" will be a mask. Every touch will echo with emptiness. But when you do the work, when you stop chasing completion in another and begin integrating your own depths, something miraculous happens. You stop needing, you stop chasing, you stop twisting yourself into shapes for women who never knew who you were in the first place. You stop playing roles. You become rooted, grounded, present, and from that stillness, a new kind of magnetism emerges. Not the desperate kind that begs to be noticed, but the kind that radiates truth. You no longer attract women who want a fantasy. You attract women who want the real, because you've become real yourself. And you'll know when it happens. You'll feel it, because she won't ask for a show. She won't expect a performance. She won't fall in love with potential or projection, or your silence pretending to be strength. She'll look at you without masks, without myth, and she'll stay, not because she needs to be saved, but because she's already saved herself. She won't make you the center of her meaning. She won't ask you to carry her soul. She's done the work. She's met her shadow. She's reconciled with her animus. She's burned through her own illusions, just as you have burned through yours. And that's why, when she finally stands before you, she won't ask you to bend. She won't mold you. She won't fix you. She won't complete you. She'll meet you fully, honestly, as a woman who no longer needs to be worshipped, only seen. As a woman who doesn't want to play God in your life, only to walk beside you as an equal. No masks, no games, no roles, just presence. Two humans, two souls, two mirrors, and the space between them, finally real. And in that meeting, there is no desperation. There is no clinging, no begging to be seen, no posturing to be loved. There is no performance. There is only truth. And that truth, as Jung taught, is the rarest, most dangerous kind of love, the kind that demands nothing, yet offers everything, because it is not born from need. It is born from freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to stand side by side without illusion, without masks, without fear. That kind of love cannot be earned. It can only be met. But let me warn you, most of you will never experience this. Not because you don't want it, but because you'll quit before you get there. You'll settle for the script, for the fantasy, for the fragile validation of being seen as someone you are not. Because facing who you really are, stripped of charm, stripped of roles, stripped of armor, still feels unbearable. But if you can resist that temptation, if you have the courage, the brutal, soul-wrenching courage to keep walking anyway, to keep standing alone, to keep peeling away every layer you built to be accepted, then eventually you will arrive at the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful. You will find yourself. And when you do, women will no longer be the source of your identity. They will no longer be the mirrors you use to feel like a man. They will become something else entirely. Partners, not prizes. Mirrors, not mothers. Allies, not saviors. And you will love them, not because you need to, but because you choose to. From strength, from sovereignty, from a wholeness that no longer asks for permission to exist, from a place that knows, without apology, who you are. Carl Jung didn't hand us a map. He left us a warning that every man who refuses to confront his own unconscious will be forever trapped in the projections of others, especially the projections of women. But he also left us a challenge, the challenge to become whole, the challenge to walk the path of individuation, to stop blaming women for the roles we volunteered to play, to stop outsourcing our wholeness to someone else's gaze, to stop waiting to be chosen. Because the man who chooses himself fully, unapologetically, relentlessly, is the man who cannot be controlled by fantasy. He cannot be seduced by performance. He cannot be reduced to a character in someone else's narrative. He becomes the author of his own life. And if you've made it this far, if you've felt this message land somewhere deep inside you, don't just scroll away. Don't let this become another piece of content you consume and forget. Take one moment right now to like this video. Share it with another man who needs to hear the truth. Subscribe for more. Your support isn't just for us. It's for the next man, the one still trapped in the illusion, still waiting to be chosen, still giving away his soul without knowing. Help us reach him. Help us wake him up. Help us set him free, one man at a time. There is a kind of success the world reveres, yet it quietly devours the soul. It shines on the surface, praised, admired, even envied. But beneath the applause, something sacred begins to erode. Not your title, not your status, your truth. In chasing this kind of success, people build impressive lives, careers with weight, reputations with polish, resumes that gleam. And still, something slips, something quiet, something vital. The connection to who you really are begins to fracture, not in a loud, obvious way, but slowly, invisibly, until you wake up with everything and feel like a stranger to it all. See, the modern world doesn't demand that you know yourself. It demands that you perform. It offers ready-made dreams and one-size-fits-all ambitions, paths that look right because everyone else is on them. But just because a path is crowded doesn't mean it leads anywhere real. And when you reach that goal, you never question. The feeling isn't pride, it's distance, not just from the world, but from yourself. Carl Jung didn't define success by what you could accumulate. To him, the true achievement was staying whole in a world that asks you to split in half, to preserve the soul, not just progress the image. Because when that integrity fractures, it doesn't matter how many peaks you reach. You're still lost, not out there but within. This isn't about rejecting the world. It's not a call to abandon ambition or retreat into fantasy. It's a call to realignment, to come back to the center of your own being, to remember that any success that asks you to betray yourself is not success. It's a silent failure wrapped in a round of applause. So the question is not just, what have you achieved? But rather, who did you stop being to get here? This isn't a warning. It's an invitation, a moment to pause, not to quit, but to turn inward and ask, is this mine? Is this me? Because sometimes the deepest emptiness isn't loud. It's the quiet ache that no achievement can touch. And if you felt it, if some part of you is whispering that something essential has been left behind, then this message is for you. No formulas, no quick answers, just one honest direction. Return to yourself, without guilt, without hesitation, and without fear of abandoning what was never truly yours. You might believe you're steering the wheel of your life, that your choices are deliberate, conscious, yours. But stop for a moment and trace them back. How many of your recent decisions came from clarity? And how many from fear? How many times have you said yes when every part of you was whispering no? How many times have you smiled at praise for things that left you hollow inside? These aren't small questions, because they point to something deeper. The growing distance between the life you're living and the life that's truly yours. There's a vast difference between living and performing a life, and many people, maybe even you, are stuck in roles they've learned to play so well that they no longer know where the mask ends and the self begins. What Carl Jung called identification with the persona isn't just a philosophical idea. It's what happens in real life, every day. It's how you show up to work polished and agreeable, how you speak just enough truth to seem sincere, how you regulate your tone so that no one ever sees too much. It's how you suppress the wildness of your emotions just to appear composed, even when everything inside you is pleading to overflow. Living like this doesn't just exhaust you, it disconnects you. You begin to form relationships not with others from your truth, but with them from your image. And eventually, it dawns on you. They don't really know who you are, and maybe you don't either. The disconnection doesn't crash down all at once. It settles in quietly. It starts when you bite your tongue instead of speaking up, when you agree out of habit, not conviction, when you start filtering your spontaneity to seem acceptable, mature, professional, and then one morning, you wake up with the haunting sense that you're living a life that looks like yours, but isn't. And here lies the quiet danger. The world will keep rewarding you for this role. It will celebrate your composure, applaud your consistency, promote your performance, and no one will notice the quiet emptiness carving itself into your chest, because that kind of pain is invisible. It's functional. It doesn't disrupt the meeting or ruin the photo. It hides behind success, but you'll feel it in the silent anxiety attacks that show up without warning, in the restless nights where sleep won't come, in the unshakable hollowness that success can't fill. This is the cost of a life performed, and the truth is sharp, but it must be said. If you keep performing, you will forget how to be yourself, and when that forgetting becomes complete, there's nothing left but a body that works and a soul that doesn't speak anymore. So before the disconnect becomes irreversible, take a moment, not a break, a reckoning. Ask yourself, brutally and sincerely, who is this version of me that I'm showing to the world? And more importantly, who had to be buried inside me to make this version possible? Because here is where the trap of success reveals itself. The very thing you were told would fulfill you may be the very thing that's erasing you. And it's time to bring that truth into the light. Let's go deeper into this pattern. Let's unravel the invisible trap that distances you from yourself while convincing you you're winning. If this message is resonating with you, if something inside you is stirring, then stay close. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. This journey isn't about giving up your path. It's about finding the courage to walk it without losing yourself along the way. You've been conditioned from the very beginning to believe that success equals fulfillment, that if you just follow the formula, get the degree, land the stable job, reach financial independence, life will reward you with happiness, peace, meaning. But what they didn't tell you is that you can accomplish all of that and still feel profoundly lost, because the kind of success the world sells rarely nourishes the soul. It often flatters the ego but leaves the deeper self starving. And the problem isn't success itself. It's what happens when success becomes the sole metric of a life's worth. when your days, your energy, your decisions, and your relationships are all rearranged to serve a goal that never asked what you truly need to feel alive. And the closer you get to that goal, what you thought was there, the more you begin to sense that there is no destination at all, just another benchmark, another rung, another layer of performance. Carl Jung once said, "The unlived life is a disease from which one can die." At first glance, that may sound dramatic, but pause, really feel into it. How many people do you know who did everything right, checked every box, made all the moves, and still live with quiet misery? Their lives look stable from the outside, but inside, it's an emotional erosion, chronic anxiety, numbness, relationship breakdowns, a persistent, formless grief. That is not a coincidence. That is the direct outcome of a life severed from its own essence. Success that's rooted in external validation comes at a cost. It asks you to adapt to environments that don't embrace who you truly are. It requires that you conform, dilute, suppress. Your creativity becomes inconvenient. Your sensitivity, a weakness. Your spontaneity, a liability. And all of it is disguised as growth. But this kind of growth often grows in the wrong direction. Outward, away from the self. You scale the ladder, yes, but only later do you realize that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. And now you're trapped. You've invested so much time, effort, identity, that turning around feels like failure. You've created an image that others believe in, an image you now feel obligated to maintain. And every time you think about walking away from it, guilt arises, fear takes over, so you stay, you perform, you preserve the illusion. And this is the real trap, the success that locks you into a life you can't leave without feeling like a failure. But let me tell you something that few will. Failure is not changing course. Failure is continuing to betray yourself just because the numbers look good. Failure is becoming unrecognizable to your own heart just to keep everyone else comfortable. Failure is silencing all the internal warning signs simply because the world keeps clapping. But here's the truth. Quiet, steady, and liberating. There is still time, but only if you're willing to look directly at what you've been avoiding. Because success without self-alignment isn't success. It's a subtle form of self-destruction, one that leaves you celebrated on the outside, but collapsing within. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you can pivot, not away from your life, but toward a version of it that finally feels real. So how can you tell if this is already happening to you? What are the everyday symptoms of this inner erosion? What does it actually look like when your soul is being edited out of your life? That's what we'll explore next. We'll bring this disconnection out of the abstract and into the concrete, where you can see it clearly, name it honestly, and begin to reclaim what's been fading in silence. You won't wake up one morning with a blaring realization that you've lost touch with yourself. It doesn't happen like that. The disconnection creeps in slowly, quietly, like fog rolling into a familiar street. No alarms, no announcements, just a gradual fading of clarity. It weaves itself into your habits, your tone, your choices, until one day you realize you've been living, maybe for months, maybe for years, as a carefully edited version of yourself. A version that gets things done, keeps it all together, but no longer feels. So how do you know if this is already happening to you? The clues are subtle, but constant. Start by examining your decisions. Are they grounded in your own truth? Or are they built on the fear of being seen as difficult, ungrateful, too much? How often do you say yes, not because you want to, but because you're afraid of what a no might cost you? And when you say, I want this, do you mean it? Or are you echoing what others expected you to want? Pay attention to your silences, the times you swallowed your truth for the sake of peace, the moments you felt the urge to speak and instead chose the safety of staying agreeable, the conflicts you avoided not because you were wise, but because revealing how you really felt would have broken the illusion you've been upholding. Every time you hold back just to protect the image others have of you, you abandon a small but sacred part of yourself. And then there's your energy, not the physical kind, but the psychic kind, the kind that lives in your chest, in your breath, in your emotional atmosphere. When your day ends, do you feel spent or fulfilled? Do the things that fill your calendar also fill your spirit? Or are you pouring yourself out into tasks and roles that return nothing but exhaustion? Because when you live disconnected, everything starts to feel muted. The vibrancy fades, the spark dims. What once made you feel alive begins to pass you by unnoticed. And the scariest part? You start to call this numbness normal. Watch your emotions. When the self is distant, the unconscious begins to protest. Small frustrations trigger big reactions, or worse, beautiful moments pass right through you, untouched. You find yourself snapping at trivial things or feeling nothing when you know you should feel everything. That's not dysfunction. That's a backlog of neglected emotion, repressed memories, unspoken needs, unfelt truths, all of it building pressure beneath the surface until it leaks out sideways. And then your identity begins to dissolve, not all at once, but in layers. You become a chameleon, a version of you at work, another with your friends, a different one still with family, but none of them feel entirely true. You're not choosing who to be. You're adapting constantly to maintain connection, to avoid disruption, to survive. And somewhere in that survival, you forget how to access your own center. This is also why being alone becomes so hard. The silence becomes unbearable. Because in that silence, all the questions rise. What actually moves me? What do I even want? What matters to me? Not to them, not to the world, but to me. And the truth is, you might not know anymore, and that's terrifying. But it's also revealing. These symptoms, this disorientation, this background ache are not random. They are signs, signals that your life is drifting off its axis, that something inside you is calling to be remembered. And now that you know how to recognize these signs, the question becomes urgent. What can you do about it? How do you begin to listen again? How do you reawaken a connection to your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, without burning down the life you've already built? That's where we're going next. We'll explore real, tangible practices that gently pull you back to yourself. Practices that don't require you to destroy what you have, but to realign it with who you are. Let's begin that process together. The good news is that losing yourself is not the end of your story. In fact, it may be the beginning of something far more honest. That sense of being adrift isn't a failure. It's a call, a quiet, persistent invitation from the unconscious to come back home. And in this case, home isn't a place. It's you, your center, the version of you that never needed an audience to feel real. But this return to self isn't something that just happens. It's not automatic, and it won't be handed to you in a moment of clarity. It requires intention, presence, and most importantly, action. So for a moment, let's leave theory behind. Let's step away from ideas and step into experience. There are practices, simple, grounded, and accessible, that can serve as bridges to your own inner reunion. And the first of them is disarmingly basic, yet profoundly powerful: the radical listening of silence. And by silence, I don't mean guided meditations or soft music with gentle voices leading the way. I mean real silence, raw, undistracted. No phone, no playlist, no agenda, just you sitting in stillness. It sounds easy, but for those who have been disconnected from themselves, it can feel almost unbearable, because once the outer world quiets down, the voices you've ignored, the doubts, the grief, the truths begin to rise, and that's exactly where the healing starts. The discomfort is not a barrier, it's the doorway. What feels like unraveling is actually reconnection in motion. Another essential practice, one that Carl Jung spoke of often, is the dialogue with the unconscious. You can begin this through deep, uncensored journaling. Take a notebook and write freely. No filters. No need to sound intelligent or coherent. Don't perform. Don't edit. Just pour whatever is inside you onto the page, as if no one will ever see it, because no one will. This process bypasses the persona and opens a direct line to the parts of you that have been silenced. In that space, truths begin to surface. Sometimes they take the form of memories. Sometimes it's raw emotion. Anger, longing, sorrow, clarity. Whatever shows up, welcome it. Without judgment, without resistance. Alongside this, make space in your life for what I call rituals of symbolic reconnection. These don't need to be grand. In fact, the smaller they are, the more powerful they become. Take a walk without music, not to reach a destination, but simply to feel your feet on the ground and listen to your breath. Cook a meal slowly, intentionally, as a quiet act of care for yourself. Say no to something small, not because it matters, but because you want to feel the strength of your own boundary. Each of these gestures whispers something important to your unconscious. You exist again. You're reclaiming yourself. And then comes one of the most important, yet overlooked tools on this path: progressive sincerity. This is not about suddenly declaring your truth to the world or cutting ties recklessly. It's about identifying the spaces in your life where you've been the most silent and choosing gently to express yourself there. Not all at once, just a little more honestly, a little more clearly. Every micro choice to stop pretending becomes a brick in the foundation of your reconnection. And with each one, your inner structure grows stronger. You begin to inhabit yourself again. But understand this: the path to authenticity is not paved with ease. It involves deconstruction. And that can be terrifying, because the more you start living from your center, the more your presence begins to disturb the roles and dynamics others have come to expect from you, especially those who quietly benefited from your performance. And this brings us to one of the hardest and most liberating parts of the journey: the pain of disappointing others, because it will happen. It must. And paradoxically, it's one of the clearest signs that you're finally beginning to live for real. No meaningful transformation happens without discomfort. And perhaps the most painful, most feared, yet most necessary form of discomfort is the experience of disappointing those who once applauded the version of you that was never fully real. When you begin the journey back to yourself, when you stop accommodating, stop pretending, start setting boundaries where there used to be quiet compliance, something shifts. Others feel it, and they don't always respond with grace. The pushback doesn't come in grand confrontations. It shows up in small, subtle cracks. A coworker who grows distant because you're no longer eager to blend in. A family member who subtly withdraws because you didn't follow the path they imagined for you. A friend who flinches at your newfound honesty. And perhaps most haunting of all, those silent looks of disappointment, not at who you are, but at who you stop pretending to be. Here's the truth. When you begin living more truthfully, you start to break invisible contracts, unspoken agreements that were never consciously made, but that have governed your relationships for years. The disappointment others feel isn't directed at your authenticity. It's directed at the version of you they constructed, the agreeable, quiet, pleasing, reliable version. And losing that version can feel like a betrayal to them. But it isn't a betrayal. It's a birth. Because every time you choose honesty over appeasement, every time you disappoint someone by being real, you forge a new agreement with yourself, a pact of loyalty to your soul, a declaration that you will no longer abandon yourself to keep the peace. But this requires immense courage, because the pull to go back, to make it easier, smoother, softer, is strong. You will want to apologize for taking up space, for making others uncomfortable, for stepping outside the role they placed you in. But there's a brutal truth here that cannot be avoided. The price of never disappointing others is always self-abandonment. You silence your needs. You bury your desires. You keep living in dynamics based not on truth, but on conditioning. Jung spoke of this very moment. He called it individuation, the painful separation from inherited identities, from social roles that no longer serve. And yes, it hurts. You will feel strange. misunderstood. You may even be labeled selfish or cold. But remember, there is no way to truly find yourself without losing what was never really you. And then, something unexpected begins to happen. The relationships that survive your return to authenticity start to feel different, richer, fuller, real, because they are no longer built on performance, but on presence. And new connections begin to form. This time, with people who resonate with your essence, not your act. This is the beginning of a different kind of success, one that can't be measured by status or applause or approval. It is quieter, but deeper. It is the kind of success that allows you to look in the mirror, not just the one in your bathroom, but the one of your own consciousness, and feel peace. That mirror is where the real work begins, in the stillness of night, when no one is watching, when the noise fades, and you are left with only yourself. What do you see? What do you feel? Jung reminded us that the soul doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't chase your goals. It isn't moved by applause. The soul craves one thing only: truth, wholeness, integrity. And if you spend your life chasing external markers of worth, you will eventually pay for it with the one thing that can never be replaced: your authenticity. True success is not a finish line. It is not a moment of external recognition. It is an internal alignment, a quiet, steady commitment to live from your center, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you, even when others don't understand. It's the courage to be disliked, the bravery to walk alone, the strength to start over, just so you can stop lying to yourself. And here's the secret most won't say aloud. Living in alignment with your truth will hurt at first, but it will free you in the end. Yes, you might lose people. You might lose comfort. You might even lose a version of stability. But what you gain is something no applause can offer: inner coherence. And that coherence, being able to stand in your own presence and feel at home, is the foundation of any real joy, any real peace. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because something in you has already awakened. Something in you is no longer willing to live halfway. That's the part of you you must now follow, the part that remembers, the part that wants to come home. So let me ask you, when in your life did you begin to lose yourself? Or better yet, what are you now ready to reclaim? Write it in the comments. Not for me, for you, as a declaration, a step, a signal to the part of you that's been waiting for permission to return. And if this spoke to you, don't stop here. The next video continues this journey, one conscious step at a time, because the road to self-knowledge is long, but every step you take is a quiet revolution against everything that tried to make you forget who you are. I'll meet you there.